Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop, Hand Planing Wood. In this video, I'm going to show you how to flatten, smooth, and leave finished the face of a board. It's incredible what you can do with a hand plane. You'll never use sandpaper again. Stay tuned. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. All right, I'm going to take a second to sell you on the concept of hand planing a surface to a finish. I took a piece of cherry because I think better than any other wood, it shows the example of why planing is superior to sanding. So this is a surface that has been planed, and I might add, it takes mere seconds. There's no dust to deal with, and when you're done dimensioning, you're also done and ready for a finish. Not only that, but it keeps it nice and flat, edges nice and crisp. Now, the same board that has been sanded, and you instantly see a dulling in the color. I always tell people that it's like taking a piece of wood and putting a piece of frosted glass over it. Now it does feel smooth to the touch, but if you look at that surface under magnification, it's a bunch of little scratches with little hairs as a result. It takes a lot longer, and you have to deal with the dust, not to mention the expense of sandpaper. But then again, I suppose you could argue you get the expense of sharpening stones as well. However, they do last a long time. Now, I'm going to work under the assumption that you already know how to sharpen and have a good, properly sharpened plane. If you need help with that, check in the video I've posted here, and that'll teach you the principles of sharpening that takes literally less than a minute. Now, if you're new to woodworking or you have limited tools, then you may want to consider buying your wood at a big box store where they sell it in a condition called S4S, or surfaced on four sides. Now, I've got some examples in front of me. This is a piece of maple, it's a piece of cherry, piece of ash, piece of walnut. And while all of these can be processed with a hand plane, I'm going to suggest you start with something like pine. Don't beat yourself up. Allow yourself the opportunity to develop the technique before you have to develop the muscle to deal with these more dense, difficult woods. I say difficult, it really isn't, but pine is so much easier to plane. If you don't have a power jointer and a thickness planer, I'm going to suggest you're probably better off buying that S4S at the big box store. It's just going to save a whole lot of work. But even though you buy it already surfaced, you still have to prepare it. We want to get rid of the mill marks caused by the thickness planer. We've got to take it down to the proper width, proper length, and get it ready for the final finish. And that's something we can do with the hand plane. So before this is over, I'm going to show you how to get that board perfectly smooth. Okay, first thing we got to do is get this held securely in the bench. So I assume you have some kind of a bench and some kind of a bench dog to hold it. But as I'm about to put this in place, you're going to notice something. This is not sitting flat. You know, wiggle side to side. If I clamp that in place, in the process of planing, this is going to, what's the word?
Flex.
This is going to flex under the weight of my plane and bounce right back up, which means I'll never get this board flat as a result. So the first thing I have to do is figure out where the high point's underneath. And this is the downside to buying lumber that has already been surfaced and is close to the final thickness that you want. As it sits there in that big box store or moves around, it's going to absorb moisture and it's going to go out of flat. Chances of getting it perfectly flat from the store, slim to none. So our first task is, how do we get rid of this? Well, I'm going to set it on a reference surface. This is my bench and this is my reference surface, so it needs to be flat. And as I wiggle that corner to corner, obviously it means that there's a pivot point somewhere other than here and other than here. And as I do that, and I'm watching to see where it moves, it looks like right underneath here, I'll mark it up on top, right underneath here is high. And if you look real close right here, you'll notice that it's not actually pivoting there. It's moved back a little bit, so it's somewhere right underneath here. Now I'm going to suggest that you just tackle these one at a time and just address it a little each time so that you don't make the problem even worse. Now you can, if you want to, clamp that in, but because I'm going to have to flip this back and forth several times, I'm just going to work up against the bench dog. So I'm going to turn this over, and I'm just going to take this corner off, assuming that's the high spot. I'll hold the board with one hand up against the dog, and using the hand plane with my other hand, I've got it set for a fairly fine setting. Let's flip that over and check it. Make sure there's no debris on there. You don't want a little chip of wood causing the problem that you're trying to rectify. Okay, still moves. Now before I jump over here, and I don't want to take it all off of one spot because then that's going to make this end of the board really thin. But before I leave this, I'm going to see if I can't make it a little bit better. So I'm looking carefully to kind of notice where it is. I'm going to take a little heavier shaving, so I just brought the blade out a little bit more. Get yourself some magic plane wax. The reason is, it just makes it so that your effort is spent pushing the blade through the wood instead of pushing the plane over the wood. So I don't know if you can see the area that I'm dealing with, but here's where I've planed. And I'm just going to try to bring that a little bit to the left and a little closer to me just to blend it in. I'm not getting much off of there, so brought my blade out a little bit more. All right, let's try that. Remember, clear the debris. No, I still got a big... Okay, we're right back on this corner. But I've already worked that a fair bit, so I'm going to come up here. Now, you'll notice if I wiggle this, it's no longer up here. It's right underneath here. This, you go through this a few times and you'll be a lot more attentive when you're buying your lumber. You see something that's really twisted, I say leave it there because it's probably going to continue to move. Now, I don't want to leave any shavings on there. Make sure the area is clean. Okay, we moved the pivot point back here. Oh, wait a minute now. I'll flip that around. Let's get this, keep it oriented the same way. Okay, right underneath the X. Make sure you keep that bench dog low enough that you don't hit it. Still up here. Okay, it's a lot closer, but we can make it even better. Now, when the smaller the error is, the harder it is to diagnose. But as I wiggle this, I can still see that I'm right underneath here somewhere. I'm also going to pull my blade back in because I don't want to make the problem worse. And a very light problem requires a very light solution. That was still heavier than I wanted. Okay, that's much closer. I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to take a light pass. Pull the blade in. Try that. Okay. Oh, wait a minute now. If I push hard enough, I can still get that to move. So it's right up here. If you look, it's hard to spot, but what you want to do is look all along this edge. And what I'm doing is I'm pushing here, then I'm pushing here. And you want to try to locate that pivot point. And it looks to be right underneath here. Pull the blade in, so I'm taking a lighter pass. I think I actually saw the problem. It was where the last pass started, and it left a Little bump. Okay, so there's no movement at all, this corner to this corner. There's still just a little bit. Now, what I want to decide is which is worse, the high spot over here or the high spot over here. And I think it's the one over here that's going to be easier to deal with. No, I'm not getting anything. A little more blade. And the problem is resisting the temptation to take 10 shavings when you should have only taken 3. Okay. No sooner said it. Another pass right down here. It's really close. All right, now I can deal with that. All right, now we're ready to go in and make this surface perfectly smooth. Okay, I'm going to show you 3 planes. We're going to try to talk about which is the best plane for this job. So what I have in front of me, on my right is a 4.5. This is called a smoother. I'll actually tell you the length of them while we're discussing this. So this one is 10 inches long. This is a jack plane. This is 14 3/4 inches long. And this is a jointer, and this one is 22 inches long. This one is out, not if we want to flatten. Problem is that if you use a smoother, it has a tendency to ride the bumps, the hills and the valleys, leaving it smooth, but not necessarily flat. You could use a jointer, but I've got my jack, which is my favorite, and based on the length of the board, this one will do it. But certainly, this is not being ruled out. I just choose, maybe because of the weight, this is a little easier to handle. So this is designed, this is called the rear handler tote. And it's actually a 3-finger grip. So I put my index finger, you can put it out here, I keep it underneath here just so I don't bang into something and smack my finger. If you try to put 4 on there, it squeezes your pinky. And I've actually gone in and I modify my rear tote so that I can take this down and it doesn't put so much pressure on your pinky finger. When you're planing a wide board, you're going to need to keep your hand up here on that front knob. I don't grab it like that. I usually just have it underneath my palm. And I can't tell you why, just personal preference. Actually, before we actually start doing this, let's talk a little bit about setting this up. Now, if you want help, more detailed help about getting your plane set up to get it ready to plane, check out this video and that'll walk you through it. What I'm going to do, I've already sharpened the blade. I'm going to use my adjuster knob to bring the blade out. Now at this point, and I'm wiping the dust off the sole, and you only wipe one way, by the way. I can see all of the blade, and it looks to be parallel to the sole. Now this is critical because I don't want to be taking off more on the right or left side. I want it to be a uniform width and uniform thickness shaving side to side. This actually looks pretty good, so I'm going to leave it as it is, but I'm going to retract the blade. I'm going to spin the adjuster knob in a counterclockwise rotation and pull the blade all the way in. The reason is I don't want to start planing with the blade out more than I might think it is. What will happen is I may end up digging into this more, and then you've got some real issues. Now, just before I start, I'm going to put another coat of wax on there just to reduce that friction. All right, I want to get this flat, and I want to get it smooth. If I plane like this, meaning keeping the blade parallel to the edges, then I really am not referencing off the rest of the board, and I could end up leaving the board with a hump or a hollow. If I hold my plane on a bit of an angle, now the plane is actually reading the full width of the board with each pass. And this is going to go a long way in helping you get this nice and flat. When you first start, meaning before you actually engage the wood, you've got to start with the blade behind the end of the board. So you're starting using the front part of the plane. That requires a lot of force here to keep that plane from drooping. And all my right hand is doing is really just supporting the weight of the plane and pushing forward. I'm not doing anything else, no downward pressure at this point. I want my first pass, it's easier to do this with a pencil. My first pass is going to be right here. I always want part of the blade hanging over the edge to make sure that I go right to the edge and don't leave a little bit on here. The next pass will go right about here. So this will be number 1. Number 2 will overlap a little bit of the first pass so we don't have a bump left there or a section unplaned. Number 3 is going to be right here. Same idea. Overlap a little bit of the previous. And number 4, overlapping part of the third and a little bit of the blade hanging over the edge, again, to make sure we don't leave a strip unplaned. And the first task is to go in there and just get rid of all of the rough exterior. Now, that night may not seem rough, but if you were to put a finish on there, you would see all of these ripple marks that the rotary action of the planer has left. There's actually a big scratch right there too, a big dent I'm going to have to get rid of. Now this is mostly a leg exercise. I don't use my arms. Well, I shouldn't say I don't use them, but most of the work is going to be done with my right leg. So all the weight is right here. I engage the wood. Now, I haven't got my blade out yet, so as I'm planing, I'm going to start spinning my adjuster knob. And what I want to discover, and this is the best way to do it, is my blade parallel to the sole. Moving a little bit more. Each time I'm bringing the blade out a little bit more. Okay, that looks to be about right. So now we'll go back to this technique we talked about. All the weight right here, edge of the blade hanging over the left side of the board, step over. Now, as you can hear, I'm skipping along because the thickness planer often leaves what we call snipe, but there's actually marks all along here where it hasn't left a perfectly flat surface. Third pass overlapping the second, and fourth pass overlapping the third, and eventually we'll be actually taking the edge, taking the surface right to the edge. All right, so if you could see that in the light, it's kind of hit and miss, which just means this is not perfectly flat. In fact, we can hold our plane like this, and looking underneath, using this as a straight edge, we can see that we've got a bump in the middle, and that bump in the middle goes pretty much all the way down. So I'm going to address this a little bit differently. I'm going to go straight from one end to the other. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to keep doing it until I no longer pick up any wood. And I'll explain this to you. Okay, I'm not getting any wood. So there's a bit of a hump in the board. If you look at your plane upside down, the blade only goes from here to here. So by taking off that hump, I'm eventually going to bottom out on these two surfaces, and the blade no longer cuts. Now what that requires me to do is to step a little bit to left or right. I'm going to go to my right, take a pass, take another one. Now I'm going to go to the left side of that first pass down the middle. I'm going to come back and take another one in the middle. Step off to the right. Step off to the left of that initial pass. Now let's check this again. Still have a bump, so we haven't taken care of all of it yet. A little more wax. By the way, I picked a piece of pine that has a lot of pitch in it. If you see these dark orange colored patches, they're actually sticky. And that's just one of the things you have to deal with when it comes to pine. It'll end up building up on the sole of your plane. You can take it off with some mineral spirits. Right down the middle. Do it until I no longer get wood. I always pull a shaving out at the end of each stroke. Now I went just to the right. Then I'm going to go to the left of that center cut. I'm going to go down the middle again because the situation was fairly severe. Off to the right. To the left of that center pass. Let's check it again. Much better. Got a little bit more of a bump here than we don't. It's almost all gone here, but up here we do. So I'm going to start right about here in the middle and just do the same thing, but not going the entire length. Now I'll come back a little bit further. All right, now let's have a quick look at that. This will give you a rough idea and help you keep from making a real mess. What happens sometimes is if you don't do that, you get it smooth, but it's all out of twist. Now, I've got a situation where this half seems to be pretty good, and this half still has a bump in it. So I'm going to come back here. Middle to the right, way over to the right. Actually, blade went right off the edge. To the left, all the way to the left. Now, if I put some lines on here, that'll help us tell the story. Keep your wax handy. All right, let's see what's happening. So that came off almost end to end. To the left, to the right, back down the middle. Okay, so based on what we were doing, we're flat, side to side, until we get down here. So there's an area right here that's not being touched. So what that really tells us is this is low and along here is low. So we can't do anything about the low spots. But what we don't want to do is make the low spots even lower. So we need to bring the high area down to that point in order to get this board truly flat. I'm going to bring a little more blade into play, so advance it slightly. Then I'm going to go to the left of that center cut. Back to the middle. Switching back and forth, going from middle to the left, middle to the right. Now you'll notice that I just pull the shaving out at the end of each pass, and I do that for a reason. Some folks will lift that plane up after every pass. There's a couple reasons why I don't do that. Number one, it's heavy. Number two, if you're not careful setting it down, you may knock the blade out of alignment. So the main reason that I pull the shaving out is if you don't, when you bring it back like this, sometimes the shaving gets pulled back underneath, and then you've got to stop and scrape it off the bottom. So I find it easier to simply remove it at the end of the stroke, throw it off to the side. Okay, let's read this one more time. Flat, pretty good, pretty good, pretty good. Now we've moved our problem to right here. This is actually showing a little bit low too. So we're nice and flat along here, and we're still dealing with some low corners. So all we can do to get this right is however low that is, that amount has to come off all of this area. So I'm going to go back to what we were first talking about. I'm going to make my first pass where part of the blade is going to be hanging over the left. But when it gets down here, if I allow the plane to ride down that low spot, I'm just going to make this problem worse. So I'll show you what I do when I get there. At this point, I'm going to really bear down with my rear hand and ease up on my forward hand so that I allow my plane to read this instead of reading that. Second pass, don't need to worry about it. Third pass, fourth pass. Okay, a little more wax. Let's try that again. Really backed off with my forward hand. See what we're doing? Nice and flat, side to side, till we get to here. And I think we actually have a problem right here, so let's see if I can just kind of spot plane. I'm moving back each time so I can kind of blend that area in. All right, check this again. Okay, so we're only showing a much smaller area, but we still have to deal with it, so I'm going to bring a little more blade in. Now, I've prepared my blade where I feather the outside corners so that I can have overlapping passes meet without any detectable plane tracks. Now, if you need to, off to my left, you can watch a video that we did on blade preparation, and they'll show you how to do that. Hope we get this finished before I run out of wood. So we're down to just that little area right here. Okay, I'm going to retract the blade, take a lighter pass. Lighter still. But before I do it, I'm going to check this again to make sure we're keeping things, getting a bit of a high spot in the middle. So I'm going to go back and run end to end. Step over to the left, step over to the right, back down the middle, go to the right, go to the left. Now we'll go back, plane is skewed. Feel that? Okay, we've got some plane tracks, so pay a little more attention now. Blade is retracted. Okay, that's feeling better, but I can still feel some. We essentially have gotten rid of that low corner, or I should say we've met the rest of the board to that low corner. Okay, still got some very faint plane tracks. And don't be afraid to stop and resharpen. With that amount of work, sometimes it's time to go in and just put a fresh edge on. But this is still cutting well, so I pull the blade in a little more. Watch to see where the shaving is coming out of the mouth of the plane. If it's favoring one side or the other, you've got to make a slight adjustment. Okay, there. No detectable plane tracks. Nice and smooth. Now, it's not always going to take that much time. And I said earlier that it's much easier to finish with a hand plane than with sanding, and you'd think after all that work, that's not the case. But we still had to get rid of that low, or take care of that low corner. So whatever you do, either you had to take all that off by sanding it, or you had to deal with a board that wasn't truly flat, and that'll just screw up everything from that point forward. All right, after all that exercise, we now have a board that is nice and smooth, but we don't know if it is actually flat. So in our next video, we're going to come in and we're going to show you how using winding sticks to verify this is flat and that it's also not humped front to back. And that's critical as well. It's a lot of work to do, but once you learn how to do it, it can actually go quite quickly. If you like my method of work and enjoy my style of teaching, if you click on any one of these videos, it'll help improve some aspect of your woodworking. Now, you can do a lot better work, a lot easier, if you have good tools. If you click on the picture of the plane and the chisels, it'll take you to our site where you can find our tools, our classes, both online and in person. Don't forget to subscribe.